Powers That Be, sponsored by Alex R. White. Personal injury lawyers you can trust.
Kentucky's legislative session comes to a close this week, and many of Governor Andy Beshear's vetoes cease to exist by the end of this week if Kentucky Republicans have their way. Welcome into the Powers That Be. I'm Isaiah Kim Martinez. We know that the way the supermajority in Kentucky's legislature is structured, that Republican lawmakers can pretty much override any of Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, his vetoes. We know he has vetoed several bills that passed this session. Here are just some of the totals that we've seen throughout what was the veto period, the last week and a half. The governor vetoing 29 bills, line item vetoing 6 of them, which basically means for the budget, for example, that he can veto or negate certain provisions in a bill that he doesn't like or rejects in this case. And then one House joint resolution also vetoed, bringing our veto total to 36. And at this hour right now, if you take a live look into the Senate chambers, they are doing just that. You see the vote here, an example on House Bill 387. This is a live look into the Kentucky Senate chambers. You see votes along party lines. We have seen this all day. So there are 32 Republicans in the Senate. Sure enough, this vote for this specific bill, the veto override, is 32 yeas to 6 nays, which means 32 Republicans said, hey, we want to override the governor's veto. We want this bill to go into law. The 6 Democrats in the Senate chambers largely supporting the governor's efforts. You see the total at the bottom. Every box you see in green, those are all bills that have been successfully overridden by the Republican-led legislature, despite efforts by, again, Kentucky Democratic lawmakers to basically sustain or keep in place the governor's vetoes. Some of those bills that we have watched all session long have applied here. Some of the ones you'll see on your screen deal with education. We'll start with Senate Bill 1. This, of course, the bill to shift power away from the JCPS board and move it to the superintendent. That's Brian Yearwood here at JCPS. That passed, but the governor vetoed that bill, which we've actually seen it become law in years past. This is very similar. That was back on April 13th, the legislature overriding that veto today. We go to Senate Bill 4. Of course, this is a provision, a measure to reduce the size of JCPS's board from 7 to 5, ending all of these elected members' terms at the end of this year. All new maps, all new elections, basically to overhaul the board. Governor Beshear vetoed that one, overridden in the legislature today. And then here's another bill that got a lot of attention. If you remember back in 2024, there was a ballot amendment, ballot measure at the polls that dealt with public money going to charter schools or private schools or non-public schools. And there was a amendment or a measure on the ballot that asked if you, the voter, would like to amend the state constitution to allow for public money to be used for those efforts, some of the private and charter schools. And voters overwhelmingly voted no on that. There was a point, though, where one specific school district over in Pulaski County actually put a sort of a banner on their Facebook page that said "Vote No on Amendment 2," which was the title of this measure. And this angered a lot of Republicans, and they basically passed Senate Bill 59, which would make it illegal for school districts to publicly advocate for or against a measure that deals with public dollars, so tax resources. They cannot use that money to advocate for or against any kind of ballot measure. So this was a very, very sort of hotly contested measure that, again, passed the state legislature, and the governor went ahead and vetoed it. They overruled that veto today. So these are just some examples of sort of the politics of all this playing out. You know, the Republican-led legislature passes a measure, the governor vetoes, and then they override. There were some other provisions or some other bills that got a lot of attention that the same thing happened. House Bill 2, dealing with Medicaid, vetoed by the governor, overridden. House Bill 10, which deals with the governor's powers, same thing. Senate Bill 173, same thing. So there are many of these, and we'll continue to watch as we enter the final day of this legislative session. Now, in more news, we also know about some bills that actually did get bipartisan support. I don't want to forget about those that the governor did sign. It went into law here just several days ago, and one of them has to do with housing. Here was a piece we did on that earlier last week.
Yeah, Sunday it was completely packed, every pew.
The good news came rushing in for Pastor Tim Finley Jr. and his church.
Great time to start.
Easter Sunday was the first service for Kingdom Fellowship Christian Life Center's new location right by Churchill Downs.
Well, I've been looking at this for quite some time.
Just days later, Finley learned there may now be a chance to pair their house of worship with a place to live.
For many churches, we have land, so being able to even build or convert ministry space into housing, again, it just speeds up the opportunities.
This week, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear signed House Bill 333 into law. The measure, passed by state lawmakers, makes it easier for religious institutions to redevelop parts of their property into affordable housing, of which Louisville is tens of thousands of units short.
To sow some seeds of possibility among congregations here to say, hey, we have this old school building. Maybe we can turn it into housing for seniors or for other folks that need it.
Housing advocates like George Eklund with the Coalition for the Homeless have long pushed for the policy. It allows churches to remodel without having to go through the rezoning process, which can be tedious.
This is just about removing red tape so that churches can do it a little cheaper and a little faster.
There are several conditions developers must meet under the new law to skip rezoning. The religious institution needs to have owned the space prior to 2026. There must be fewer than 24 units of exclusively affordable housing, and the property has to be along a main road in the city.
Our mission, our call, is to help the least of these, the less fortunate.
Finley is encouraged by the move.
Through some creative planning, we can really do some good in the community.
He says it gives religious leaders another tool and the wider community hope. Connecting Frankfurt politics with national politics, I do want to mention that Republican Auditor Allison Ball of here in Kentucky is invited to the U.S. Capitol to speak about what she describes as waste, fraud, and abuse. That's according to a release sent out by the Auditor's office. She's going to actually be testifying in front of the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Government Operations. It'll be on April 15th. That's Wednesday, where she's going to talk about her efforts and what she has found through some of her investigations, according to her, millions upon millions of dollars, in her words, in mismanaged funds on an executive level. So she puts a lot of this on Governor Andy Beshear and his multiple cabinets. She'll be talking a lot about programs that are in part federally funded. So we're talking Medicaid. We're talking about a lot of child care services. The governor, of course, has called a lot of her audits revealing some of these details. He's called them partisan in nature. He said that she is playing politics, and the governor is going to keep moving forward on these efforts. Regardless, the auditor's reports here are going to be interesting to see what she has to say in front of federal lawmakers tomorrow, including, of course, Congressman James Comer, who many in Kentucky know well. Now, another member of Congress, Kentucky's delegation, Republican Senator Rand Paul, was just south of Louisville in Elizabethtown this week, and our own Conrad DeLuche was able to hear from him when it comes to Iran and sort of his thoughts on the latest actions by President Trump and, of course, this ceasefire.
I think it's important to the people sacrificing their lives to know that their country actually took the time to debate the pros and cons of the war.
And Senator Rand Paul says that debate should have happened at the very beginning.
It's the initiation of war, and the Constitution says the declaration of war. It didn't happen that way.
While the United States and Iran are in the middle of a 2-week ceasefire, talks over the weekend collapsed between the two sides without reaching an agreement.
I think that's bad news for Iran, much more than it's bad news for the United States of America.
Just a couple weeks ago, the Pentagon sent a request for millions of dollars in funding to continue the war. Congress would have to approve that spending, a price that Senator Paul does not want to add to the nation's debt.
So my first question will be, where does the money come from? It's going to have to be borrowed. So even though I'm for a strong national defense, I think borrowing more money makes us weaker, and it impacts our national security in a negative way.
While the fighting is far away, the senator says there are two real costs of the war here at home: the price at the pump and the human sacrifice, including 2 Kentucky service members, Sergeant Ashley Pruitt and Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, both from towns close to Elizabethtown.
I think any soldier's death is an incredible sacrifice that they and their families, have given for their country. And while I have a constitutional debate with the president, I have no debate with the families.
The ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is scheduled to expire next week, with no future talks scheduled at this time. In E-Town, Conrad Alouche, WHAS 11, on your side.
Of course, a lot of this, right, when it comes to gas prices, that is the real concern for many folks at home. The longer the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, it does put that global pressure on the markets, which then, of course, drives up what you pay at the pump. In Louisville, prices are anywhere from about $1.40 or more from where they were prior to this war starting. So something to keep track of as we go into the summer to see if those prices can dip under $4. Right now, the average is quite a bit more than that. Now, when we come back, we're going to be speaking to one of our U.S. Senate candidates, of course, vying to replace Senator Mitch McConnell. This is a new series that we're going to be starting out where we interview one each week. We're going to have Dale Romans, the Louisville horse trainer, when we come back. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Sue, distracted driver.
I'm attorney Alex White. If you're injured, visit SueDistractedDriver.com.
Welcome back. We're going to be starting a new series here on the Powers That Be that dedicate 1 week for each of the top high-profile candidates running for Mitch McConnell's U.S. Senate seat. We know that there's a handful of Democrats and 3 primary Republicans. We hope to get them all into this studio by the May 19th primary. The first person we started with is someone who is local to the Louisville area. He's a thoroughbred horse trainer here. His name is Dale Romans, running as an independent Democrat in this race. Dale, we appreciate you coming in and taking the time.
Isaiah, thanks for having me.
So obviously this is a huge race, and this is a race that pretty much started the moment that Mitch McConnell said he was retiring, right? This was back last February where Daniel Cameron, I believe it was within minutes, the Republicans said, count me in, and pretty much everyone has trickled in after that. You were kind of somewhat, would we say you were a later commitment for this race?
I would say I was a later commitment, but I've never been in politics before. I'm not a normal politician, so I had to make some calls and see what some people thought that I respected their opinions of, and see if someone like me could win this race. I think it's time for us to have someone who's not in politics. I've always been a political junkie, and I've worked on Capitol Hill in my role as president of our horsemen's group on quite a few situations that affect horse racing. So I've always liked the idea of it, and I said I'm too old to start at the State House and try to work my way up, so we might as well go for Washington.
You talked about how you've consumed politics for so many years. A seat like this doesn't come up, for 40 years. In Mitch McConnell's case, what was the thing that for you said, or maybe it was a support, someone said, hey, I'll support you in this. How did you know this was a serious thing you consider?
I think the state of the nation is the most serious thing. I think the nation's ready for someone who's not a political insider to take this jump. I think that's why Trump got elected. He wasn't a political insider. And, Mitch McConnell was never going to lose his seat. You can't remove leadership and put a freshman in. We were the 3rd largest recipient of federal money, the state of Kentucky, for years since he was in leadership. His federal politics and mine don't align at all. But he did send a lot of money back to Kentucky, and we weren't going to vote him out. Same thing on the other side. We had Bunning for 30 years. That's why I keep thinking people keep saying that a Democrat can't win this seat. Well, we had 2 strong candidates in those seats for long periods of time, so we didn't get a real chance. There's only been 1 open seat, and that was Rand Paul. And he did win that seat. But there's nothing to say a Democrat can't win this seat.
You were on a debate last night with one of our competitor stations here in Louisville, and you were on the stage with 4 of the other high-profile top Democrats running in this race. And I don't believe I had heard your answer quite when I made it into the station this morning, but I heard the question, and that was, is there something that you agree with the Trump administration on it, whether it be a policy, whether it be an initiative? And it seemed like the 4 candidates who spoke before you essentially said no. Is that something where you differ a little bit?
Yeah, I think that they've done a good job securing the border. You know, immigration's a big part of why I'm running. I really believe immigration reform is important to our country and to the state of Kentucky. We need that labor force. But you have to have, there's several steps. Secure the border first, then work to document the people who are here undocumented, and then do total immigration reform. And I think I've got a good handle around that subject. But securing the border, they've done a good job of that. You know, people have a misunderstanding about how immigrants get here. And there's really an underground railroad, and we need to go after that. They call them the coyotes, and people pay them thousands of dollars to smuggle them across the border. It's not like they go where a fence would be and climb over and come across. The majority of them are smuggled in the underground railroad. And with all our intelligence, I think we need to be focused on that spot, stop the coyotes, and secure the border, and have a common sense immigration law put into place that works well for labor and works well for the immigrant.
You know, you said this, and let's talk about, you'll be on the airwaves here this week, is what I'm told. It's a statewide ad blitz, right? We know that you will be, I believe, the first Democrat to be on the air in this U.S. Senate race. Tell me about the ad first thing, because I read the verbiage, and for people who know you, none of it should come as a surprise, but what were you really trying to highlight there in that 30-second spot?
I mean, a lot of people know me in Kentucky and in Louisville as a horse trainer, and they know me that, but in Kentucky, you think everyone knows horse racing and all the players. Well, it's not true. It's still a small part of the state. So I need to introduce myself to everybody else out there and let them see that I'm just one of them. But I just decided it's time to do something different, and I'm tired of Democrats losing. It's time for us to win this seat and for a moderate Democrat to try to move in and move the party back to the center where it's supposed to be and where it was always for years.
You know, you say in the ad, I wouldn't be beholden to the party, but I also wouldn't be a puppet to the president. We've talked about areas in the past where you disagree with the president. You know, the mass deportations is one. You've talked about how, you know, a lot of the labor force, not just in the horse industry, but others, hospitality, you name it, rely on migrants, rely on a migrant workforce. But tell me about maybe an area where you would disagree with Democrats currently, right now, where maybe you would be that vote that would be on the other side, sort of the Rand Paul or the Thomas Massie of the left, where maybe you would be a D voting with ours. Is there an example that you'd like to share?
The shutdown. I don't believe the government should ever be allowed to shut down. State governments can't shut down and they work out their problems. But when you're holding people's paychecks, political hostage, there's something wrong with that. You know, and I disagree with everything ICE is doing, working as the nation's police force and going out and rounding up people who really haven't done anything wrong. They're just trying to make a living and send their money back home. But there's no reason to shut down. We can't just line item ICE. We also have, you know, the TSA. We have cybersecurity. We have Coast Guard. They're all under Homeland Security. We can't hold those paychecks hostage when people have to go to work. We tell them you have to go to work, but we're not going to pay you until we figure out our political dispute. And to me, that's insane. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't be allowed.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about your top healthcare and economic sort of priorities. You've talked about how you want to repeal the tariffs, ACA subsidies. You want to get those back in place, the enhanced subsidies, at least until Congress can figure out a better path forward. Can you outline again what some of those economic and healthcare policies that are priorities to you?
Well, the Republicans keep talking about repeal and replace, and to me, I've been saying on the trail all along, that's wrong. If you find something better, then replace it, then repeal it. But you can't have that dead time where so many people are off their insurance. That's what causes skyrocketing insurance costs. So if we get a lot of people in a room, we come up with something better than the Affordable Care Act, well, I'm all for it. I don't care who comes up with it, Republican. But right now, it's the best thing we have. So we need to repeal the big, ugly bill. We need to take the money that's all pumped into ICE and put it back where it belongs, into Medicaid. We need to give the tax credits back to the people so they can afford to buy insurance, because the more people buy insurance, the less it is for all of us. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep as many people on insurance plans as possible until we come up with, hope I get to Washington and it's a bipartisan thing. We put a lot of smart people, bipartisan group in a room and try to figure out this system.
You know, you've talked about your priority being, you know, getting the Senate and the House back. That's pretty much what most Democrats will say. We got to operate it from a position of power. But we asked this in our forum, and I wanted to ask you it again. How do you make meaningful policy changes as a Democrat if, say, the House flips, but maybe the Senate doesn't? And you guys are sort of operating on this like ping pong match where everyone's trying to sort of outdo what the other one's doing. How do you make progress for Kentucky in, say, those 2 years or more, if that's the case?
Well, see, that's part of the checks and balances that our forefathers put in place that have worked for 250 years. And I think it's always better to have differences inside either the Congress, the Senate, or the President, to where everything doesn't just flow real fast. You have to discuss it. You have to get bipartisan agreement on bills, big bills especially. This is a big ship, and it should move slow. And that's what our forefathers wanted. Right now, they've got the House, they've got the Senate. The only thing holding this whole thing together without just Republican right-wing issues being pushed down our throats is the filibuster. And, I think we have to hold that in place because that gives the minority group on either side at least a voice in the Senate, and it separates it from Congress. But when we get in there, if we can slow down all the stuff that Trump's trying, and everybody has seen, I don't blame anybody for voting for Trump when he ran, but they got a bait and switch. He's not doing what he told them he was going to do. He's done absolutely the opposite on a lot of issues. So if we get in there and we can slow him down, pass some good legislation that everyone will agree on, and wait our 2 years out, I think it would be the best thing to have for this country.
The governor, Andy Beshear, the Democrat here in Kentucky, who's the leader of the party for all intents and purposes here in the state, he talks about the average price of home buying now is about $40,000, which to many folks out there who've owned their home for many years, that's shocking for a lot of people. The price to own a home, the ability to own a home, affordability at large. What could you do as a member of the U.S. Senate to address affordability from a housing perspective and for everyday bills?
The housing perspective, I think, it's a pretty simple reason why. I saw a report yesterday that we are 10 million houses short in this country. So we need to get out there and start building more houses. There's a supply and demand issue, which drives all economies. And I think there's some things that we could work on, like giving tax credits to developers. And so they don't have to get as much profit on each individual home, but use the tax credits on bigger projects, just like we did when we fixed Whiskey Row here and these old buildings. Nobody was going to come in and invest in those buildings, but they got the tax credits, so it made it worthwhile. I think we could do some programs like that to encourage builders to build homes that are less expensive and get people in them living and get the 10 million houses on the market that we need to bring the prices down.
Mm-hmm. Your answers on Israel got a lot of folks' attention, at least in the media, and we might be a little in the weeds. We're not truly objective, right? Because we mince words constantly. But you were asked both in interviews in the past and the forum that we had, you were asked about your stance on Israel. And in our forum, at least, you gave an interesting answer, and you said, I support Israel as an ally or believe Israel is an ally, but I don't support Netanyahu. To some people, you can't do one without the other. Can you explain kind of your stance? Because you did call it genocide, what's happening in Gaza as well.
I think you can go over and ask Israeli people if they are 100% behind Netanyahu, and most of them will tell you they're not. There's a lot of word on the street that if this war is over, he's going to jail. So I think you can definitely support the Israeli people and the intelligence that we have in the Middle East. We can't lose that. There's no way. Our national security depends on our cooperation with Israel. Now, do I agree with Netanyahu and the way he handled this war? No, not at all. But I do agree that Israel is important to us, and I do like the Israeli people. And he talked about AIPAC giving money. I don't have a problem with anybody giving me money because I can't be bought. I mean, the only reason to be afraid to take money from someplace is that you're afraid that you're going to sell out to them. I'm not going to be bought. I mean, if AIPAC wants to send me money, that's sure. It takes a lot of money to win a campaign, get me on Capitol Hill, but that doesn't mean they own me.
I was in Lexington. I was actually covering one of Charles Booker's campaign events, and there were a group of young progressives in the room, and honestly, even maybe older millennials and people of that age who really saw foreign affairs, Israel, support for Israel, sort of a red line for them. They asked one of the candidates, I believe one of the candidates running for the 6th congressional seat, and they asked, how would you categorize what's happening in Israel? And the moment they could not say genocide as the first thing, some people just tuned out. How do you appeal to younger progressives who seem to be so set on a couple issues? If you don't see eye to eye on them, you talk about running from the middle, that's not good enough for a lot of them. How do you appeal to those?
Then they're not going to vote for me because I'm just going to tell you the way I see it.
And you're okay with that?
I'm okay with that. But tell me, like Charles stood on stage the other day and wanted to challenge everyone to say they won't take money from AIPAC. Well, that's a pretty brazen thing to do when you know AIPAC's never going to give you money to begin with. So it kind of aggravated me standing up there. No, but, and I would ask Charles, and I would ask those kids, what are we going to do in the Middle East if we lose Israel as an ally? Where are we going to get all of our intelligence? There's been war over there for thousands of years. There's a lot of hatred for the United States in a lot of those countries, including Iran. What are we going to do without them? Now, if you can tell me a better system and you want to get away from Israel, then maybe we can do that. But right now, they're an important strategic ally for the safety of the United States.
Just a couple more questions. I want to touch on the progressive thing one more time, because I know you talked about how this is about the general, and you're correct. You do have to win the general. You do have to compete against a Republican in a Trump-heavy state, right? A state that favors the president. However, you do need to get out of the primary. How do you appeal to progressives? And I know you said they're not going to, some of them might not vote for me, but the polls do show Charles Booker is ahead, and that could be a big reason why. How do you make this push toward maybe some of the younger folks who maybe they listen to you and they just don't feel pulled in your direction?
Well, I would tell them the most important thing is that we win this race. And I'm running to win the primary and the general. I'm not going to change paths if we get out of the primary. But if you want Democratic legislation to get to the floor, then you need a Democrat senator sitting in that seat. And it's going to take a special Democratic senator candidate to win this seat. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at the big picture. It's good to be idealistic, but it's better to be realistic. And we need to win this seat as a Democratic Party. And you're not going to win it by being far left. You got to be centrist. You got to be common sense and talk about pragmatic things that really matter and the things that you can do to help. And you talk about Charles as leading in the polls. Charles has the name recognition. He's already run twice. Running twice. And the only one really in there besides Amy that has name recognition, and he's only about 35% approval rating. You know who's leading this race is the undecided. And that's what I'm out there trying to get.
How do you win those over in the final weeks?
You tell them who you are. You get your message out there, and you hope that just answering the questions, not talking political rhetoric all the time, connects with them.
Where are you going to try to, what areas?
WHAS.
In the state.
In
Where
the
else
state, right? I'm leaving here and going to Lexington and doing something. I'm going to Hillbilly Days in Pikeville. I'm really looking forward to that. That's supposed to be a fun event, Eastern Kentucky. And we're going to get around all we can. We're going to roll out our new ad and get that statewide, and hope people will go to DaleRomans.com and learn more about me.
Before I let you go, Al Sharpton, the Reverend, had his big convention, the National Action Network, and Governor Beshear was one of the, they say, presidential hopefuls, right, who are going to be there and who were there in New York City talking. I don't know if you saw any of the experts or the excerpts from it, but Reverend Sharpton was asking the governor questions, and he sort of hinted at, he got some feedback. He reminded some people, Beshear did apparently, of a 1992 governor who ran for president. And he just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that situation and the conversations he's having.
Nothing better could happen to this country than to elect Governor Andy Beshear as president. He's proven that he can win in a red state, that he brings people together. He's not a divider. And there's nothing I'd rather do than commute back and forth with my friend on Air Force One.
All right. That's the mic drop moment for Dale.
All right.
Dale,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy.
Powers That Be, sponsored by Alex R. White. Personal injury lawyers you can trust.